The Apache woman said, "You need a wife like me," and the cowboy froze. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, dressed in a worn leather coat and hat that had seen many seasons. His eyes, dark and steady, scanned the endless landscape. Though the land was vast and open, there was a quiet loneliness that hung around him like a shadow. Years of traveling, hard work, and loss had shaped him into a man who trusted few and carried his burden silently. He had come to this part of the country for work, a ranch that needed a hands-on, reliable man. Life on the ranch was demanding. The heat of the day could be unbearable, and the cold of the night could pierce even the thickest coat. Yet he preferred the hard labor. It kept his mind from wandering into old memories he tried to bury. The other men at the ranch respected him, but he never stayed long in one place. The quiet cowboy had learned that forming attachments often led to heartbreak. This land, however, was different. It bordered Apache territory, and the locals often warned him to keep a respectful distance. Stories of clashes and misunderstandings traveled fast through the nearby towns. The cowboy listened politely but never let fear dictate his actions. He knew that respect and understanding were more powerful than aggression. Still, he kept to the familiar trails and avoided venturing too far into unknown lands. One afternoon, as he guided his horse along a narrow canyon, the sky darkened unexpectedly. Clouds rolled in, heavy and ominous, and the first drops of rain began to fall. He urged his horse to move faster, seeking shelter among the rocks. The wind picked up, rattling dry branches and carrying the scent of the earth before the storm fully arrived. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder followed quickly, rattling the canyon walls. His horse stumbled over a loose stone, and he barely caught it in time. It was then that he saw her, a figure standing on a high ledge above him, calm and steady despite the approaching storm. She wore clothing of soft leather, decorated simply but skillfully, and her hair was long, dark, and flowing. Her eyes, sharp and observant, met his with a look that was neither fear nor aggression, but something deeper, something that seemed to understand the weight he carried. For a moment he froze, unsure if she would retreat or approach. She spoke then, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the canyon despite the wind. "The storm will reach you if you stay there. Come up." Her words were simple, but the tone carried authority. The cowboy hesitated, instinct urging caution, yet the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. Slowly, he guided his horse toward a safer path, finding his way to a small ledge where she had been standing. The moment he reached her, the rain began in earnest. It soaked through his coat and dripped from his hat, but the woman seemed unaffected, moving with ease across the rocks. She gestured to a small overhang where they could take shelter. He followed, still wary, but he noticed the way her presence seemed to calm even the storm itself. There was no panic in her movements, no fear, only a quiet strength that drew him in. As they settled under the overhang, the cowboy could not help but steal glances at her. She was different from anyone he had ever met. There was a confidence in the way she carried herself, a sense of self that demanded respect without asking for it. Her eyes met his, and she gave a small nod as if acknowledging the curiosity and caution he felt. For hours, the storm raged around them. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and rain battered the rocks, but inside their little shelter there was a fragile calm. The cowboy had never been one to speak much, but he found himself sharing small pieces of his story. The ranch work, the long days alone, the struggles he faced. She listened quietly, nodding at times, offering small words of encouragement or understanding. He was surprised by how natural it felt to speak with her, as if the years of solitude had prepared him for this very conversation. She, in turn, spoke of her life among her people. She told him of the challenges of living in a world that often misunderstood them, the importance of family and community, and the skills that had been passed down to her from those before her. There was no boasting, only the honest recounting of life as it had been lived. He listened intently, feeling a growing respect for her strength and resilience. As the storm finally began to subside, the cowboy realized that the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The world around them seemed almost magical in the soft light. He looked at her and felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. There was something about her, something that unsettled the careful walls he had built around his heart. When it was time to leave, she helped him guide his horse down the safer path. Before parting ways, she said something that made him pause. "You need a wife like me." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning and challenge. The cowboy froze, unsure if he should laugh, argue, or simply run away. But there was no malice in her tone, only honesty and clarity. The words struck him not because of their literal meaning, but because they seemed to touch a part of him he had long ignored, a part that longed for connection, for understanding, for someone who could see him as he truly was. He rode back toward the ranch, the echo of her words following him like a shadow. His mind replayed every detail of the encounter, the storm, her calm presence, the strength in her eyes, the words that seemed to shake his very core. By the time he reached the familiar trails of the ranch, he realized that nothing would feel the same again. Over the next few days, he found himself thinking of her constantly. The other ranch hands noticed a change in him. He was quieter, yes, but there was also a new energy, a sense of alertness and anticipation. He began to notice the landscape differently, as if the world had opened up in ways he had never seen before. The memory of the storm and of the woman who had helped him through it became a touchstone for reflection. The cowboy knew that he had crossed into a world that was unfamiliar, one that challenged his assumptions and his careful solitude. He also knew that he would return, not out of obligation, but because the encounter had awakened something in him. Something that told him life could be more than endless days of work and loneliness. And so, in the quiet of the desert, with the sun rising again over the jagged horizon, the cowboy began to understand that fate had a way of arriving when least expected. He had met a woman who was fearless, wise, and entirely different from anyone he had known. She had spoken words that would haunt him, challenge him, and perhaps change him forever. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where life was shared, where strength and respect could exist alongside love. He did not know what that future would look like, nor did he know the obstacles he would face. But he knew deep in his heart that something had begun on that stormy day, something that neither distance nor time could easily erase. After the storm, the cowboy could not stop thinking about the Apache woman. Her words, "You need a wife like me," echoed in his mind constantly. At first, he tried to ignore them, believing they were only fleeting thoughts. But the more he returned to his work on the ranch, the more he realized he was restless. Tasks he had done for years, feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and guiding the horses, suddenly felt mechanical and empty. His mind wandered back to the canyon, to her calm presence, and to the way she seemed to command respect without demanding it. Days later, curiosity overcame caution. He found himself riding toward the canyon again, despite the warnings of the other ranch hands. They had told him not to wander near Apache lands, saying it was dangerous and that he might be misunderstood. He nodded politely and said nothing, but he knew he had to see her again. There was a pull he could not explain, a sense that meeting her was important, perhaps even necessary. When he arrived at the canyon, he spotted her immediately. She was near a small fire, tending to a few tools and preparing what looked like a simple meal. The way she moved was graceful, efficient, and calm. She noticed him at once but did not startle. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, acknowledging his presence with a quiet curiosity. "Hello again," she said, her voice steady and inviting. "I wondered if you might come back." There was a sense of pride in her words, but also a simplicity that made her seem approachable. He dismounted his horse and sat across from her, careful not to appear intrusive. The fire crackled between them, sending tiny sparks into the air. They spoke for a while about simple things, the land, the weather, and the animals that roamed freely. But slowly, their conversation deepened. The cowboy began to share more about his life, how he had grown up far from this land, how he had learned to survive through hard work, and how loneliness had shaped him. She listened without interruption. Her dark eyes held understanding, and she occasionally nodded as if confirming that his feelings made sense. When he mentioned the isolation he felt, she did not offer empty comfort. Instead, she spoke of her own life, growing up in a world that demanded strength and careful judgment. She described the challenges her people faced, and how respect and courage were essential to living in harmony with the land. The cowboy was struck by how similar their struggles were, even though their worlds were so different. Both had learned to survive through strength and careful choices. Both had endured isolation and the fear of being misunderstood, and yet she carried her challenges with a confidence he had never seen before. Her presence was commanding, yet she was not unkind. Over the following days, he returned often. Each visit revealed more about her life and her people. He observed the rituals, the skills, and the way she moved with the land rather than against it. She taught him small things, how to recognize tracks of animals, which plants were useful for medicine, and how to find water even in the driest places. Each lesson carried not just practical knowledge, but wisdom about patience, observation, and respect. He began to realize that she was unlike anyone he had ever known. She was independent and strong, yet capable of kindness and gentle understanding. She could endure hardship without complaint, and yet she noticed the smallest details in her surroundings. He admired her courage, her intellect, and the calm way she faced challenges. At the same time, he struggled with his feelings. Society had taught him that a cowboy must be independent, that he could not afford distractions, especially from someone from a different world. He feared judgment, rejection, and the potential for conflict between their peoples. Yet every time he thought of leaving, he felt a pull that made the decision impossible. Her words from that first meeting haunted him. "You need a wife like me." She turned to him, her dark eyes catching the last light of the day. "You worry too much about what others think," she said quietly. "A man must follow his heart, not the voices of those who do not understand him." He wanted to argue, to convince himself that caution was safer, but the honesty in her voice left him no room to hide. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The cowboy noticed a change within himself. He was less burdened by his past, less afraid of connection, and more willing to see the world through a lens of understanding rather than fear. But their closeness also brought challenges. Rumors began to circulate in the nearby town. People spoke of a cowboy spending too much time near Apache lands, hinting at danger or scandal. The cowboy felt tension rising around him, but he refused to let it dictate his choices. He knew that the connection he had found was real, and that it mattered more than the whispers of others. At the same time, the Apache woman faced pressure from her community. Some feared that her kindness toward the cowboy could lead to betrayal or trouble. Others questioned whether a bond between their peoples could survive in a world so quick to judge and divide. Yet she remained calm, confident in her own judgment and in the honesty of her feelings. One day, as they walked along a quiet riverbank, she stopped and turned to him. The sunlight danced on the water, highlighting the strength in her features. "You are different when you are here," she said softly. "You see the world more clearly, and yet you are afraid to admit it. You need more than work and solitude to be complete." With her, he glimpsed a life that could be richer, more fulfilling, and full of meaning. Yet doubt lingered. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. Their worlds were different, and prejudice could threaten everything they had built. He feared rejection from both sides, feared that love alone would not be enough to overcome the barriers of culture and society. But each time he looked into her eyes, he felt courage he had never known. The turning point came one evening when the wind carried a soft chill, and the sky was painted with deep purples and reds. They sat together, the quiet river flowing beside them, and she spoke with a calm authority that seemed to echo through the canyon. "You will never know what is possible if you do not try," she said. Fear is the enemy of life. If you follow it, you will remain alone. If you follow your heart, you may find strength you did not know existed. He felt a shift within himself, a sense of readiness to face whatever challenges lay ahead. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, he thought about the first time he had met her. The storm, the fire, the calm strength she had shown, all of it had changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand. He realized that life had a way of presenting opportunities that could not be ignored, and that love, respect, and courage often required bold choices. By the time the first light of morning touched the canyon, the cowboy knew he had been transformed. He was no longer just a man of work and solitude. He was a man capable of connection, understanding, and commitment. The Apache woman had shown him a world beyond fear, a world where strength and gentleness could coexist, and where courage could lead to love. And so, as the desert awoke to another day, the cowboy prepared to return, not just as a visitor, but as someone ready to embrace the lessons, challenges, and possibilities that lay ahead. He had discovered a bond that transcended differences, a connection that promised growth, respect, and perhaps a life shared with someone extraordinary. The cowboy returned to the ranch, but nothing felt the same. The days passed slowly, and the work, once familiar and comforting, now seemed hollow. Every sound, every smell of the desert reminded him of her, the Apache woman who had shown him a world beyond fear, a world beyond loneliness. He remembered her words, "You need a wife like me," and they haunted him. He could not stop thinking about her, about the way she moved with confidence, the way her eyes seemed to see through him, and the calm wisdom in her voice. Yet returning to the ranch brought new problems. The other men noticed his distant gaze, the way he often stared at the horizon as if expecting someone to appear. Whispers began to circulate. "He spends too much time near Apache lands," some said. Others questioned his loyalty and intentions. "Why does he risk going there? It is dangerous," they murmured. The cowboy tried to ignore them, focusing on his duties, but the murmurs grew louder. He felt their judgment like a heavy cloak on his shoulders. He realized that the world he had returned to was not the same world he had left behind. He had changed, and now the people around him seemed smaller, more limited in their thinking. They could not understand what he had felt, what he had learned. Their caution and fear seemed petty compared to the courage he had seen in her eyes. Meanwhile, the Apache woman also faced pressure from her own people. Some elders were wary of her connection with the cowboy. They feared that trust could lead to betrayal, that showing kindness to a man from another world could endanger their way of life. Others questioned the wisdom of opening herself to someone who did not fully belong in their culture. Yet she remained calm. She had always trusted her own judgment, and she believed that strength and honesty could bridge the gap between their worlds. Despite the obstacles, the bond between them continued to grow, though now it was marked by uncertainty. They met when they could, sometimes in hidden valleys, sometimes at the edges of the canyon where the world could not easily intrude. Each meeting brought joy and connection, but also tension. They both knew that their closeness could provoke conflict, yet neither could deny the pull that drew them together. The cowboy felt a storm of emotions he had never experienced before. On one hand, he was drawn to her strength, her wisdom, and her independence. On the other, he was afraid of the consequences, what his life would become if he openly embraced this bond. Society had taught him to remain cautious, to avoid scandal, and to prioritize reputation above all else. Yet his heart rebelled against these lessons. He wanted honesty, courage, and connection, and he saw all of that in her. One afternoon, as he rode toward their secret meeting place, he felt the weight of the rumors pressing down on him. He knew the townsfolk would whisper about his absence, perhaps accuse him of foolishness. Yet he pushed the doubts aside, guided by the certainty that he needed to see her. As he approached the familiar rocks, he saw her waiting, calm and composed as always. She smiled, not mockingly but with warmth that seemed to calm the unease within him. They spent the day together, walking along the desert paths and talking quietly. The Apache woman shared stories of her people, tales of courage, survival, and the importance of respect. She spoke of the land, of the animals, and of the skills passed down from ancestors. The cowboy listened intently, feeling admiration grow for her strength and wisdom. He realized that her world, though different from his, held lessons he could never have learned alone. As they sat together under the shade of a large rock, she spoke of the challenges she faced. "People fear what they do not understand," she said. "They judge quickly, without seeing the heart of a person. You must be brave enough to follow what is true for you, even if others do not approve." His fear of judgment had kept him isolated for years, but now he could see that courage required more than hard work. It required honesty and commitment to what one truly valued. However, challenges continued to mount. The townsfolk's suspicions grew, and subtle threats began to appear. Tools went missing, fences were tampered with, and whispers turned into pointed remarks. The cowboy realized that staying distant was no longer an option. The world demanded that he either conform to its expectations or embrace the path his heart dictated. He also noticed changes in himself. The bond with the Apache woman had awakened a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. He began to question the very rules he had lived by, rules that had kept him safe but had also kept him lonely. He felt a growing strength, a willingness to face adversity, and a desire to defend what he now valued most. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, they sat together on a high ridge. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of sage and earth. The cowboy spoke of his fears, of the doubts that plagued him, and of the tension between his heart and the world around him. She listened carefully, her dark eyes steady and understanding. "Fear is natural," she said softly. "It shows that you care, but fear must not control your choices. True strength comes from knowing what is right and following it, even if the world resists." Her courage had awakened something in him, a recognition that life was worth embracing fully, with all its uncertainty and challenge. The days turned into weeks, and each encounter brought new lessons and emotions. They laughed together, shared meals, and spoke openly of their hopes and dreams. The cowboy noticed that he was changing. He was less fearful, more willing to trust, and increasingly aware of the beauty in small moments. The Apache woman, in turn, seemed to grow closer to him, her calm confidence blending with affection and understanding. But the pressure from the outside world continued to build. The rumors in town became harder to ignore, and subtle warnings from her people reminded them that their connection could not be completely safe. Yet, both refused to retreat. They understood that love and respect required courage, and that avoiding challenges would not bring fulfillment. One night, after a long day in the desert, they sat together by a small fire. The stars sparkled above, and the world felt vast and full of possibility. The Apache woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You have the strength to face what others cannot," she said. "Do not let fear decide your path. You are capable of more than you know." He realized that the journey he had begun was not just about love, but about discovering his own courage and integrity. He understood that the path ahead would be difficult, that prejudice and misunderstanding could challenge them at every step, but he was ready to face it. Their bond, forged through respect, shared experiences, and quiet courage, had become unbreakable. They had learned from each other, growing stronger in the face of adversity. The cowboy no longer felt the emptiness that had haunted him for years. With her, he had found connection, meaning, and a vision of a life that could be full and shared. As the fire crackled and the desert night enveloped them, he reflected on the journey so far. He had met a woman who challenged his assumptions, who showed him strength and wisdom, and who spoke truths he had been too afraid to hear. She had opened his eyes to a world beyond fear, beyond isolation, and beyond the limits he had set for himself. By the time dawn arrived, the cowboy knew that he could not turn back. The connection they had built, The respect and affection that had grown between them demanded that he act with courage. He would have to confront the fears, prejudices, and challenges that awaited them. But he also knew that their bond was worth the risk, and that love guided by respect and honesty could overcome even the greatest obstacles. For the first time in many years, the cowboy felt ready to face the world not alone, but with someone who matched his strength, shared his values, and inspired him to be more than he had ever imagined. The Apache woman had shown him a path forward, a path of courage, understanding, and connection. And he knew that no matter what trials lay ahead, he would follow it, step by step, with hope and determination in his heart. The cowboy rode through the desert before sunrise, the sky just beginning to glow with soft pink and gold hues. Each step of his horse felt heavier than usual, though he knew it was not the horse carrying the weight, it was him. For weeks he had wrestled with uncertainty, fear, and judgment from both the ranch and the surrounding towns. But now he was determined. Today he would make a choice. He could no longer remain in limbo, unable to embrace the connection he had found with the Apache woman. As he approached the familiar canyon, memories of their time together flooded him. The storm, their first meeting, the quiet moments by the fire, the lessons she had taught him, they were all vivid in his mind. Each memory reminded him of the courage she had shown, the patience she had offered, and the wisdom she had shared. She had become more than a companion. She had become a guide, a teacher, and a mirror reflecting the man he could be. When he arrived, he saw her waiting as always. She was perched on a rock, observing the desert with a calm expression. Her hair glinted in the early light, and her eyes, dark and steady, met his as if she had been expecting him. For a brief moment, neither spoke. They simply regarded each other, the unspoken connection stronger than words. Finally, he dismounted and approached her, his heart pounding. "I've made a decision," he said quietly, though the words felt heavy. "I cannot go back to a life that keeps me apart from you. I know the risks, the judgment, and the challenges, but I cannot ignore what I feel." "Then we will face them together," she replied. Her voice carried certainty, and it gave him strength. For the next few days, they prepared to face the world beyond their secluded meeting places. The cowboy knew that his return to the ranch would be noticed, and that whispers and questions would spread. Yet he also knew that avoiding life was no longer an option. He had learned through her guidance and through their shared experiences that courage required action, not silence. When he finally returned to the ranch, he noticed the change immediately. The other men looked at him with curiosity, some with suspicion. "Where have you been?" one asked, trying to mask concern with casual tone. The cowboy met each gaze with calm honesty. "I've been learning," he said simply. "Learning about life, about respect, and about understanding." At the same time, the Apache woman prepared to accompany him, to show that their bond was real and that it was not a fleeting connection. Her people, who had initially questioned her judgment, had begun to recognize the honesty and courage in both of them. She had spoken with the elders, explaining that their bond was built on mutual respect, shared values, and understanding. Slowly, they began to accept that the strength of character mattered more than origin or difference. The cowboy and the Apache woman faced small obstacles along the way. Some townsfolk were still wary, and there were subtle tensions whenever they moved together. But with each challenge, they learned to communicate more clearly, to defend their bond with patience and courage, and to demonstrate the integrity of their intentions. One afternoon, as they traveled together through the open plains, they encountered a situation that tested their resolve. A group of ranch hands confronted them, questioning the cowboys' choices and the presence of the Apache woman. Voices rose, tension flared, and judgment seemed inevitable. The cowboy took a deep breath, recalling her lessons about courage and truth. He spoke clearly, without anger or fear. "She has shown me strength, wisdom, and honesty. I will not abandon what I know is right, even if others cannot understand it. We are equals, and we will face life together." Some eyes still carried doubt, but others reflected newfound understanding. This event marked a turning point. The cowboy realized that facing fear and judgment openly, with honesty and integrity, could transform even the most difficult circumstances. The Apache woman understood that courage was not about confrontation, but about standing true to one's principles. Together, they embodied a quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. As the days passed, their life together began to take shape. They worked side by side, not only tending to the ranch but also learning from each other. He taught her skills he had mastered over the years, handling horses, guiding cattle, and navigating the landscape. She continued to teach him her knowledge of the land, the plants, and the ways of her people. Their partnership became a blend of wisdom, skill, and mutual respect. But the greatest lessons were not practical. They were about life, trust, and understanding. The cowboy learned to embrace patience, to listen deeply, and to appreciate perspectives beyond his own. The Apache woman learned to balance caution with openness, realizing that love and respect could bridge worlds if approached with honesty. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, they sat together on a ridge overlooking the land they now shared. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a symbol of both challenge and freedom. They spoke quietly, reflecting on their journey and the obstacles they had overcome. "You have changed," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth and pride. "You are stronger, more patient, and more courageous than when I first met you. You have learned that life is not just about survival, but about understanding and connection. And you have taught me that courage and honesty can change everything. I never imagined a life like this, but now I cannot imagine living any other way." In the quiet of the desert, under the vast sky, they understood that true partnership required trust, respect, and courage. Over time, the townsfolk and their communities began to recognize the integrity and strength of their bond. The whispers faded, replaced by cautious respect. People began to understand that love, built on honesty and mutual understanding, could bridge differences and inspire growth. The cowboy and the Apache woman settled into a life together that balanced tradition with openness. They continued to work the land, care for the animals, and contribute to both communities. Their partnership was not without challenges, but each difficulty strengthened their resolve and deepened their connection. Years later, looking back on that stormy day when they first met, the cowboy understood how much that single encounter had changed his life. Her words, spoken with confidence and honesty, had forced him to confront fear, embrace courage, and follow a path that ultimately led to fulfillment. The Apache woman had not only entered his life but had reshaped it, teaching him the value of love, respect, and shared strength. Together, they became a living example of unity between worlds, showing that courage, honesty, and mutual respect could overcome fear and prejudice. They had learned that life's greatest rewards often required risk, and that love, when guided by integrity and understanding, could endure even the harshest challenges. As they walked side by side across the desert, the sun casting long shadows before them, the cowboy felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every trial. He had found a partner who matched his strength, complemented his character, and shared his values. And most importantly, he had discovered a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The Apache woman glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "We have faced the storms together," she said, "and now we walk forward, not just surviving, but truly living." Together they moved forward, ready to face whatever the future might hold. Their bond, built on courage, respect, and honesty, was unbreakable. The cowboy knew, with certainty, that he had found not only a partner but a true companion for life, a woman whose presence had forever changed him, and whose strength had shown him the meaning of courage, love, and unity. And so, under the vast expanse of the desert sky, with the wind carrying whispers of the past and promises of the future, the cowboy and the Apache woman continued their journey together, each step a testament to the power of connection, respect, and the bravery to follow one's heart.